and he cut it down to 300 men. And in Judges 7:12, it describes the enemy. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley, and it was the valley of Moab. And they were like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number like the sand by the seaside for multitude. It doesn't mean that God couldn't count them. It means that standing there and looking, there was no way you could sort out heads or animals to make a count. They were just like the sea sand. And here was Gideon with his 300. You know who won? Gideon. And all he did was make a bunch of noise, and the Midianites and Amalekites all killed each other in the confusion. You see, when you add the supernatural, then the few not only become heroes because of their courage and their devotion, but because of their victory. One more illustration. And maybe this sums up the point. 1 Samuel chapter 13. Turn to it for a moment. The seemingly endless struggle with the Philistines is going on. Saul is the reigning monarch of the people of Israel. And they again face a battle with the Philistines. They are in a severe situation. Very bad. And as you flow through chapter 13, it goes from bad to worse to worst. Verse 5, 1 Samuel 13. The Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. 30,000 chariots. 6,000 horsemen. And people like the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they come up and encamped in Michmash eastward from Bethaven. Now here is an overwhelming enemy. Literally overwhelming enemy. And when the men of Israel saw they were hedged in, for the people were distressed, the people did hide themselves in caves and thickets and rocks and high places and pits. You just get the picture. They see these Philistines, everybody dives for the nearest cover. Jumping in holes and caves and behind the bushes, climbing hills. And some of the Hebrews, verse 7 says, even went over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. They got out of the country. They left the nation. And Saul was in Gilgal, and everybody else was shaking. Overwhelming enemy. Verse 8. He tarried there 7 days, according to the set time Samuel had appointed, but Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. He's getting a little antsy now. And Saul said, bring here a burnt offering to me and peace offerings. Now he's getting so nervous that he's got to do something religious to get God involved. And so verse 9 says he offered a burnt offering. And Saul said, bring this burnt offering, and he offered the burnt offering. Now the problem with that is there was only one personality in the land that was permitted to carry out the offering of an offering. And who was it? Priest. Saul is intruding into the office of a priest. It came to pass as soon as he had ceased offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him that he might bless him. Now he's going to act real religious, see, real spiritual. And Samuel says, what have you done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed. And he knew that he was a representative of God, and he wasn't there. And the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash, and he's going on all of these excuses. Well, you weren't here, and the time was running out, and the Philistines were there, and I said, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal. Self-defense here. I'm going to get it. And I haven't made supplication to the Lord. And I forced myself, therefore. In other words, I just knew I shouldn't do it, but I just made myself do it. And offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. If you just obeyed God, God would have defeated the Philistines and established your kingdom for good. But, verse 14, now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart. Who was that? David, the next king. And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. Your disobedience got you nothing. Now the problem to begin with was an overwhelming enemy, and now the problem is a lack of a leader. They not only have an overwhelming enemy, but they've just lost their leader. To make it worse, verse 19, there was no blacksmith throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make themselves swords or spears. Apparently the Philistines had sort of eliminated all the blacksmiths, so they couldn't make any weapons. So all the Israelites, verse 20, went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his plowshare and his mattock and his axe and his sickle. And they had a file for the sickles and the mattocks and the forks, the axes, the sharpen, the goads. In other words, all they had left was farm implements. And so they were all there sharpening their farm implements to use in this war. And the only people who had a sword, it says in verse 22, were Saul and Jonathan. Third problem. Number one, overwhelming enemy. Number two, no leader. Number three, inadequate weapons. They really are in trouble. Now watch what happens. Jonathan says to the young man that bears his armor, chapter 14, verse 1, come, let's go over to the Philistines' garrison that's on the other side. You see, now wait a minute, Jonathan. What are you going to do? You take your armor. The armor bearer was usually a small boy. What are you going to take this little kid and go do this for? What's the point? Verse 6 kind of crystallizes it. This is the key verse. And Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let's go over to the garrison of the uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us. Now watch this line. Here's the key. For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by what? Few. Did you get that? It doesn't matter to God whether you have a lot or a little. That is never the issue with Him. He can put all of His divine power through one person as easily as He could put it through a multitude. Doesn't matter to the Lord. Verse 7, his armor bearer said to him, do all that is in thine heart. Turn thee, behold, I am with thee according to thy heart. Now that's a good little guy. That's a good guy. All right, Jonathan says, you and me, let's go over there and take on the Philistines. And he says in verse 10, if they say, come up unto us, then we'll go up. For the Lord hath delivered them into our hand, and this shall be the sign. In other words, God, we're going to trust you to give us a sign. If they say, come up, we'll say, the Lord's going to give them to us, and we'll go right up. Philistines are up on the heights, and they're down below. And so they got there in verse 11, and they said, hey, up there, Jonathan and my armor bearer. Verse 11, and both of them disclosed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they've hidden themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan, his armor bearer,